That evening, I was alone. The house felt unusually quiet. Even the clock in the living room ticked louder than usual. My husband Eric was away on another business trip, and I reminded myself once again that I was used to this silence. I put the kettle on, intending to spend the evening with a book, but suddenly there was a knock at the door. As I approached the door, I didn't expect to see Ryan my brother-in-law. His appearance took me by surprise. He usually never came by unannounced, and honestly, his visits were always related to my daughter, Megan. But today, his arrival felt unexpected and slightly odd. "Hi, Mia," he said, smiling slightly. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an elusive glimmer in his eyes. "I thought I could help with the garage. Megan mentioned you planned to go through some old stuff." I froze for a second, unsure how to react. His offer was unexpected, but why not? "Of course, come in," I finally said, stepping aside to let him in. As he crossed the threshold, I noticed his hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been outside in the wind. He smelled a fresh ocean breeze, and for some reason it gave me a strange feeling, like the air in the room had shifted. We headed to the garage, where I'd been planning to sort through the piles of old boxes. Ryan rolled up the sleeves of his t-shirt, revealing strong forearms, and began moving the heavy boxes. I stood nearby, watching him, until I realized I'd been standing still for too long. "Are you sure you're up for doing this alone?" he asked, smirking when he noticed my thoughtful expression. "You must have been waiting for a savior." I laughed, though I wasn't sure why. "You're probably right. These boxes have been here so long they might have become part of the floor." We started working. We opened dusty boxes, pulling out old books, photos, and things that once mattered, but now seemed like distant memories. Ryan cracked a few jokes about my love of nostalgia, and I found myself laughing sincerely. His presence filled the house with an energy that had been missing for years. After a couple of hours, I suggested we take a break and get some lemonade. We returned to the kitchen and settled there, Ryan leaning against the table, turning his glass in his hands. "You know, Mia, I've always thought you were amazing," he said, looking at me. I almost dropped the glass I was washing in the sink. His words sounded so casual, but their meaning struck me deeper than I expected. "Amazing?" I repeated, trying to hide my embarrassment. "Yeah. You always have so much energy despite everything. You keep the household running, support everyone. I admire that." His voice was sincere, and I felt my heart skip a beat. A moment of silence stretched on, but I didn't know what to say. "Thank you, Ryan," I said quietly. That's nice to hear." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me a little longer than necessary. I felt an odd lightness, as if something in the room had changed. It was a brief, almost imperceptible moment, but it left a lasting impression. After the lemonade, we returned to the garage, but the atmosphere had shifted. A silence hung between us, filled with something more than words. We continued working, but now every glance, every joke seemed to carry more weight than before. When Ryan left later that evening, I closed the door behind him and stood there, leaning against it. The house sank back into silence, but it no longer felt familiar. It echoed with the hint of something new, something dangerous and thrilling. I tried to understand what exactly had happened that evening, but I had no answer. After that evening, I tried not to think about Ryan, but thoughts of him surfaced at the most unexpected moments. His words, spoken in the kitchen that night, kept echoing in my mind. "You're amazing." How could I forget that look, which seemed to see deeper into me than anyone else had in recent years? A few days passed, and one night my phone rang. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. It was late, and I hesitated before answering. "Hi." His voice was warm, but slightly hesitant. "I know it's late, but would you like to take a walk? I had a long day, and I thought some fresh air might do us both good." I opened my mouth to refuse, but the words didn't come. This was unexpected. His offer sounded so natural, as if there was nothing unusual about it. Minutes later, I was stepping out of the house, throwing on a light cardigan, and heading to the beach a few blocks away. Moonlight silvered the ocean, and waves gently lapped at the shore. Ryan was waiting for me by the wooden path that led to the sand. He smiled as I approached and took a step toward me. "Thanks for coming. I was worried you'd say no," he chuckled, a bit nervously but sincerely. "I wasn't sure I'd say yes either," I replied, smiling back. We walked along the water, our steps muffled by the soft sand. The wind played with my hair, and I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Ryan talked about his work, the challenges he faced, and how he sometimes missed just having an honest conversation. I listened, feeling the tension that had seemed constant now beginning to fade. "Have you ever thought about what you truly want?" he asked suddenly, stopping. I hesitated. His question caught me off guard. No one had asked me about my desires, about what truly mattered to me, in a very long time. I began, but found myself at a loss for words. "I think it's been so long since I considered it that I don't even know." Ryan looked at me with a gentle, almost sad smile. "That's not right, you know. You deserve more. You need to feel alive, Mia." His words hit me to my core. It was as though he was voicing what I was afraid to admit even to myself. I looked at him, and something in his expression had changed. He took a step closer, and I felt my heart beat faster. "Ryan," I began, but my voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Just one moment," he said quietly. "Just let me have this moment." His hand touched mine gently, and in that instant, time seemed to stop. Moonlight reflected in his eyes, and the breeze carried a faint hint of the ocean. He leaned closer, and our faces were suddenly just inches apart. And then it happened. His lips met mine, softly, tenderly, as if he was afraid of breaking something fragile. It wasn't what I expected. Everything was gentle, trembling, yet so honest and profound that I couldn't pull away. In that moment, I felt alive, as if the world had suddenly become brighter. But after a few seconds, I stepped back, my heart pounding wildly. We both stood there, realizing what had just happened. His gaze was filled with confusion, but also sincere concern. "This was wrong," I finally breathed. "Maybe," he replied, not looking away, "but it was real." We stood silently, listening to the waves crashing onto the shore. That moment had changed everything, and I knew it wouldn't remain just a nighttime secret. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft pink and orange glow over the Charleston sky. I sat in the kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The evening was quiet, as it usually was on these days when Eric was away. Since that night with Ryan on the beach, everything inside me had felt turned upside down. Every conversation, every glance or gesture between us now seemed filled with a new meaning. This time, the knock at the door didn't surprise me. I knew who it was. Ryan, of course. He had been stopping by more often, always with some innocent reason. Today, he offered to help with my computer, which had been slow lately. I knew I could have called tech support, but for some reason, I'd left the task for him. When I opened the door, he stood there in jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. A smile lit his face, but I saw something else in his eyes. A soft, quiet, almost imperceptible tension. "Hi," he said, nodding slightly, as if he was afraid to say too much. "Hi, come in." I stepped aside, letting him inside. He removed his shoes and walked into the living room, where I had already set up the laptop on the coffee table. His gentle movements, as always, filled me with a strange calmness and anxiety all at once. We settled on the floor in front of the table. Ryan immediately got to work on the laptop, while I sat beside him, trying not to look at him. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, and I sat in silence, watching as the screen filled with lines of code I didn't understand. "There we go. That should do it," he finally said, leaning back. "It should run faster now." "Thanks, Ryan," I smiled, but my voice sounded tense. A pause lingered in the room. He looked at me, and I felt my heart start to beat faster. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. "Yes, of course," I replied quickly. But I knew it wasn't true. The quiet of the house, the quiet of my life, felt like a heavy blanket pressing down on me. "You don't seem like yourself," he continued, frowning slightly. "Did something happen?" His voice was so sincere that I suddenly felt tears welling up. I looked away, but he had already noticed. "Mia," his voice grew softer. "You can tell me." I didn't know what to say. At that moment, he lifted his hand and gently touched mine, his fingers warm and steady. The gesture was so simple, but it made me feel something more. "Ryan," I began but stopped. "You've been putting everyone else first for so long," he said as if reading my mind. "Maybe it's time to think about yourself?" His words, just like that night on the beach, stirred something deep inside. I looked up to answer, but met his gaze. It was so intent that I felt as if he could see right through me. Before I could say anything, he leaned closer. This time I turned away. At that moment, I heard the sound of a car engine, and through the window, I saw Megan's car pulling into the driveway. "Go," I whispered. "Right now." He hesitated for just a moment, but it was enough for me to sense his struggle to read my decision. Then he nodded, turned, and left. When Megan came in, her face was bright with joy, her voice filled with happiness. I smiled back at her, but inside I was trembling. The evening passed peacefully, but the silence between me and Ryan was unbearable. I understood. This evening hadn't solved anything. It was just a temporary reprieve. The choice I would have to make felt closer than ever. Sunlight poured in through the blinds, casting stripes across the living room floor. I sat at the kitchen table, feeling as if the day was stretching out endlessly. Since that night when Ryan kissed me again, my mind had been in utter chaos. It was wrong, I knew that. But every time I closed my eyes, it all came back. His voice, his gaze, the moment that changed before my eyes and refused to be contained. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was my daughter, Megan. "Hi, Mom," she said cheerfully. "I thought maybe Ryan and I could come over for dinner this weekend. It's been a while since we've all gotten together." The words stuck in my throat. Megan sounded so sincere, so happy. And I, her mother, was now part of something that would shatter her life if she knew. "Of course, honey," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "That would be wonderful." Evening came sooner than I expected. I stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad, when I heard the knock at the door again. I knew it was Ryan. His sudden visits had become familiar, each one charged with an intensity that couldn't be ignored. "Hi," he said, stepping inside. His gaze immediately settled on me, soft but tense. "Megan asked me to tell you she'll be a bit late. I thought I could come by and help with dinner." I nodded, avoiding his eyes, and turned back to the cutting board. He joined me, starting to slice bread. We worked in silence, but the quiet felt deafening, almost oppressive. "Mia, we can't just pretend nothing is happening," he said suddenly, stopping to look directly at me. I froze. Hearing those words aloud felt like breaking an invisible barrier. "Ryan, this is wrong," I whispered, putting down the knife and turning to him. "We both know it." "We know, but that doesn't change how I feel, and you feel it too, or you wouldn't have let any of this happen." I wanted to deny it, but his words hit home. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny the truth. At that moment, he took a step toward me, and I felt my pulse quicken. "You deserve to be happy, Mia," he said quietly. "You've spent so many years living for everyone else. But when was the last time you lived for yourself?" I closed my eyes, trying to suppress the emotions rising within me. His words were too convincing, too honest. I felt as though the world I had carefully built was beginning to crumble. When I opened my eyes, he was standing close, closer than I had expected. His hand gently touched mine. It was so simple, so natural, that I didn't even try to pull away. "I'll leave if you tell me to right now," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. "But if you ask me to stay..." I couldn't find the words. My mind screamed for me to end this, but something deep inside, something I had ignored for so long, pulled me toward him. I took a step back, gathering my thoughts. "Ryan," I finally said, but my voice betrayed me. Instead of firmness, it held only uncertainty. He leaned closer, but this time I turned away. Just then, the sound of an engine outside caught my attention, and through the window, I saw Megan's car pulling into the driveway. "Leave," I whispered. "Now." He lingered for just a moment, enough for me to sense his effort to understand my choice. Then he nodded, turned, and left. When Megan walked in, Her face was lit with a smile, her voice full of warmth. I smiled back, but inside I was shaking. The evening passed peacefully, but the silence between Ryan and me was unbearable. I knew that this evening hadn't resolved anything. It was only a temporary reprieve. The decision I had to make loomed closer than ever.